Imagine you found the perfect home, your offer gets accepted, and you're excited because you're officially under contract. Then, a few days later, your lender calls. There's a problem with your financing. Whereas a seller, your house is sold, you're just waiting for it to close. And then you get a call from your agent. There's a problem with the buyer's loan. For over 30 years, I've guided hundreds of clients through buying and selling real estate. Here's what I know for certain. Understanding your contract's clauses isn't optional. It's what prevents surprises and makes a transaction work for you. Today, we're going to be talking about the Minnesota purchase agreement and particularly contingencies that can help and hurt you. Today's topic is the financing contingencies. Now, we're very fortunate in Minnesota. Our purchase agreement is written by our Association of Realtors. These are realtors writing this with buyers and sellers in mind. Quality of the transaction kept foremost. These purchase agreements are then reviewed by attorneys and each year come out. Virtually all the real estate companies in Minnesota use the same forms. It's very nice. They're written in extremely simple English. There's not a lot of legalese in it. Let's talk about the financing contingency. Like some other contingencies, can really be structured to benefit you as a buyer, to benefit a seller. There can be some negotiations. At the end of this video, I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks that you can do that helps if you're in a multiple offer situation or if you're in a place where you can be very aggressive with your offer, and as a seller, how you can protect yourself and backstop, get what you want out of the transaction. So stay tuned for that. So in Minnesota, we're very fortunate. We have two financing contingencies in our purchase agreement. One we call the top box and one we call the bottom box. Let's talk about the top box first. This one is a very clean and simple transaction, and it can be structured to be the most favorable option for the buyer or the most favorable option for the seller, depending upon how you check the boxes. So what this says is if the buyer cannot secure the financing specified in this purchase agreement, and this purchase agreement does not close on the date of closing, the buyer and seller will sign a cancellation of purchase agreement directing all earnest money to be refunded to the buyer or forfeited to the seller. So depending upon which of those boxes you checked, obviously if it's refunded to the buyer, that's the best thing for the buyer. If the buyer can't get their loan, there's a problem with their loan right up to the day of closing, they can cancel the purchase agreement and they get their earnest money back. If you want to make it favorable to the seller, if a seller wants to protect themselves, they might say, hey, wait, I'm taking my house off the market for 6 weeks waiting for you to get your financing done. If you don't get your financing, why should I suffer 6 weeks of lost market time? Why should I suffer potentially lower purchase agreement the second time around because my house is now weathered on the market? And maybe the seasons have changed and I'm out of the summer season and I'm getting into the fall season. So that would be a forfeit to the seller. And actually in the old days in Minnesota, going back about 20 years or so, the purchase agreement was very much structured in favor of the buyer. So the only option was the buyer gets their earnest money back if it doesn't close. We've moved to a place where there's a lot of negotiation that can be done within the purchase agreement, and you can structure it specifically for the transaction you have at hand. Back in about 2000, I had a client who was an attorney, and he said, I want to get the financing contingency taken care of before closing. Let's write something in that has that financing contingency being removed a week or two before closing, so I know it's going to close. And we came up with some language for that, and I got to thinking, this would be a good thing for our purchase agreements. So I brought this to the forms committee, and the forms committee worked on language, and we put together language that created this written statement date that I'm going to be talking about in a minute. And that included having a written statement before closing. Now this second box has evolved over time. The most recent evolving goes from having things being refunded to the buyer, where you can choose whether the earnest money is going to go to the buyer or to the seller. The bottom box, it says that the buyer will provide the seller with a written statement by a certain date. Now that date is typically, absolutely has to be before closing. Usually, depending upon the time between purchase agreement and closing, if it's a 4-week closing, you might give the written statement in 3 weeks. If it's a 8-week closing, you might give the written statement in 6 weeks so it's closer to the end, or the seller may say, no, I want that written statement in 3 or 4 weeks so I know it's done, and then we'll just wait out that last 30 days towards closing. And what is that written statement? It's very much defined here, and it says For the purpose of this contingency, a written statement is a written statement that's prepared by the buyer's mortgage company and is dated after the purchase agreement. So your pre-approval letter does not count as a written statement. The written statement is much further down the line where the lender has already done the things that need to be done, like checking your credit, checking your income, checking your assets, checking your employment, and also the appraisal. It goes into all of that here. The buyer is approved for the loan that's specified in the purchase agreements, that the appraisal that's satisfactory to the lender has been received, and also stating any condition that the lender requires to close the loan. So once that written statement is made, the buyer is agreeing to handle any of the conditions that the lender is requiring. So it's very important that the buyer review that before approving the release of the written statement. Upon delivery of the written statement, so once it's been delivered, if this loan doesn't close for any reason related to financing, the seller has the option to cancel the purchase agreement and the earnest money is forfeited to the seller as liquidated damages. So once you've delivered that written statement, then that earnest money is clearly at risk if you don't close because of financing. If the written statement isn't delivered by that date, then the seller may, at the seller's option, declare the purchase agreement canceled. The buyer still needs some time to get the financing worked out. Maybe the seller will let them go for a few days, but the power's on the seller's side here. And then it's a case of what box is checked. As you can see at the end of this paragraph, it talks about if the seller decides they want to cancel, the earnest money could be retained by the seller or forfeited to the buyer, depending upon which one's checked. And then lastly, if no written statement is delivered, the seller has not canceled the purchase agreement. When we get to the day of closing, the purchase agreement is canceled. And again, you'll see a toggle box there that could be retained by the seller or refunded to the buyer. So let's talk about some of the strategies you might use when you're drafting this purchase agreement as a buyer or also as a seller when you want to protect your position. One of the things I like to do in a purchase agreement is always look at who carries the power in any given clause. And the financing contingency in our purchase agreement in Minnesota is a great example of how you can balance that out, or you can structure it very much one way or the other. As a buyer, if you're buying a property and you know you're in multiple offers, it's wise to make the financing contingency as favorable to the seller as you are comfortable doing. It goes against the normal thought that you say, I really want to protect myself and I want my earnest money back if I don't get it. But if you know I've got a good job, my likelihood of a layoff is very, very slim, I'm well qualified for the loan, my money is protected, I'm not going to go off to the casino and blow my down payment. If you know all those things are true, then it's often good to go with the top box, which says if you don't close because of financing, and then have the earnest money go to the seller. When you're in multiple offers, that'll look really strong for the seller. They know that if you don't perform on your financing, they're going to be compensated for the time they had the home off the market. That's a really powerful aspect of a purchase agreement for a seller. Conversely, if you are just putting 3% down on an FHA financing, you don't have much money, you're asking the seller for closing costs, you have just enough money to do the 3.5% down payment, then probably forfeiting your earnest money if you can't get the loan is not a good idea. And in that case, you probably do want to go in to say, whatever happens, I get my earnest money back. When we talk about the second box, this can be very powerful. You can make it structured well for the sellers. But one thing I would say is I see, as a listing agent, I see this happen all the time. The buyer's agent has filled this purchase agreement out, used the second box, given us a week before closing, we're going to know the loan is approved, which is always great for a seller because they don't box things up and put it on a truck and then find out their home's not closing. But what they do that's wrong is they check off to say that if the buyer doesn't deliver the written statement, the seller can cancel the purchase agreement and earnest money would be refunded to the buyer. But then the next box, they say, well, if it gets to closing and the seller hasn't canceled the purchase agreement, the written statement hasn't been delivered, then the purchase agreement is canceled. And at that point, they say it's forfeited to the seller. Those boxes are working in two opposite directions. What will happen is that typically the date for the delivery of the written statement is a week before closing. And if the buyer doesn't deliver it, the seller could cancel and kick the buyer away to the curb and give them the earnest money back. But they're probably not going to do that because they're just going to wait 7 days till the day of closing, 1 week, and then it is canceled and they get the earnest money back. So think about it. When you do that, it makes it look like you're balancing things, but you're really giving a lot of power to the seller. And maybe that's what you intended to do, but maybe not. So think that through. The key piece of all of this financing contingency, whichever box you choose, is about earnest money. Who gets the earnest money if the buyer can't get their loan? And so let's talk just for a moment about earnest money. Earnest money can be any amount. It can be $1, it can be $1 million. It really depends upon the price range of the home and how strong the buyer wants to make the offer. It's very hard to lose your earnest money in Minnesota, but the financing contingency is one place where it is at risk. In purchase agreements I see, typically the earnest money is 1 to 2% of the purchase price. So if it's a $400,000 house, it may be between $4,000 and $8,000. The more you put down, the more sellers like it, even though it's hard for you to lose that money. Sellers feel good about that. When you're drafting a purchase agreement with your agent, that the agent is explaining the clauses to you, giving you options so you can fill out a purchase agreement that works in your best interest. Where are you giving up power? Where are you keeping power? What are you giving to the seller? What's coming back to you? Thanks for watching today. This is Bud Batterson, a realtor in the Twin Cities. And remember, in real estate, this Bud for you.